Well, I want to thank the Academy for covering this topic, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. This is work that we did at IARC about 15 years ago. I think we were one of the first to really tackle the conflict of interest problems at committees. So let me talk, my only professional compensation is now I'm an employee of the state of California, but this presentation was developed outside of working time. And everything I'm discussing here really was part of my work and previous employment at IARC, and I have no other relationships to disclose. So what are the IARC monographs? We're talking not about sponsorship of research, we're talking about sponsorship or sponsor influences on expert committees. And the IARC monographs are a 50-year-old series of scientific reviews that identify environmental factors that influence the risk of human cancer. They're developed by the experts who conducted the original research, and they're quite useful by national and international health agencies to support their actions to prevent exposure to these compounds. Now, just about the time I arrived there, the Lancet was looking into conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest on IARC work, and they wrote an editorial that said it only needs the perception, let alone the reality, of financial conflicts to destroy the credibility of organizations like IARC and its parent company, a parent organization, the World Health Organization. So this is a very serious thing. We took this very seriously when I got to IARC. And at the time, there were a range of approaches for addressing conflicts of interest. One is to ignore the issue, and fewer organizations are doing that today. Some just have disclosure only. Some have disclosure only, but check that there are not too many experts with conflicts. Some try to balance experts who have a conflicting interest with other experts who have no conflicting interests. And others try to balance the experts with an expert who has an opposing interest. But I think that another thing that we tried to do at IARC was try to avoid conflicts of interest. I'll tell you how we did that. There's a tension between competing ideals. Do you want committee work? Do you want IARC evaluations of carcinogenicity developed by the most qualified experts? Or do you want them developed by experts whose impartiality is beyond question? Because the public needs to be confident that experts with a conflicting interest have put the public interest ahead of that conflicting interest. If that's not easy to do, we need to try to minimize the role of the conflicting interest. So this question about, do you want the most qualified experts, whether or not they have a conflict, or do you want impartial experts, gives you a difficulty when an expert who has key knowledge and experience, a lot of experience in the field, also has a real or apparent conflict of interest. And it's become more visible because, as we've heard, interest parties sponsor a lot of epidemiological and experimental studies or reanalyze earlier studies. And the selection of experts who have a real or apparent conflict of interest can erode confidence in the integrity and the impartiality of the results. But the other side of that is if you omit prominent experts, this sometimes can create the perception of reduced scientific quality. And the first times I talked about IARC's approaches in about 2005, 2006, at meetings like the Society of Toxicology, I was getting a lot of comments that we're just going to have pablum because it's being done by people who really don't know the subject area, because we've missed some really important experts who have a lot of experience with the topic. So we tried at IARC to achieve both ideals by creating a new category of participant that we call the invited specialist. This is a person who's got critical knowledge and experience, but who is recused from certain activities on the committee because of the conflicting interest. And we have invited them to IARC meetings in limited numbers to contribute unique knowledge and experience. Now, the limited numbers and limited capacity. Invited specialists do not chair a meeting or subgroup. They do not draft any text that summarizes or interprets cancer data, and they do not participate in developing the conclusions. They could develop a chapter on production and use. They can develop a chapter that compiles other exposure information. They're there as a resource person so that people on the committee can ask, well, you've done a lot of the studies. What was the design? What were some of the factors that might not appear in the published paper? And so they can ask the expert for some details that you wouldn't be able to get from anybody else. So in this way, IARC meetings included the best qualified experts, but the monographs themselves and the conclusions were developed by experts who had no conflicting interest. We also note that this protected the integrity of science integrity of the scientists affiliated with interested parties. We didn't want somebody to come here to IARC from a company that was involved in manufacturing the chemical we were looking at and have their boss say, well, we want you to make sure that the evaluations consider this, we want you to lobby this and that. The expert can say, no, IARC has good written guidelines that say I can't participate there. I'm there only to answer questions when I'm asked, and I have no lobbying role. So this also protects them to be able to go there and not have to take responsibility for an evaluation that might not go the way their company wants. When we selected experts for IARC meetings, we use literature searches to identify most of the experts who published, but we also have public nominations via a call for experts that appear on IARC's website. IARC gets a declaration of interests from all potential participants. If there's no conflicting interest, they may be invited. If there is a conflicting interest, IARC will look for a comparable expert. And if necessary, that they cannot find a comparable expert because this expert's knowledge and experience is unique, the expert may be invited in a limited capacity as an invited specialist. All declarations are updated and reviewed again at the meeting in case there's something that the experts didn't necessarily understand what constituted conflict or if a new conflict arose. And I'll give you an example of something like that where that happened. The declaration of interests is pretty, I think, standard as for employment and consulting information. We went back 4 years or anticipated in the future. Research support, not only the expert's own research, but support for others in the expert's research unit or organization. If somebody is the chair of the department and they don't necessarily work on a particular project, but they have a grant and say half of their staff work on that grant, they have a conflict. They have an interest in making sure that that grant continues for their employees. So we ask about the grants that come into the experts organization as well. And then the standard financial interests of stocks, business interests, and patent rights, for example. But we go beyond that. When we do get a declaration of interest, we look at it and we often will call up the potential participant and ask questions. So we try to ask specific objective questions, and I'll give you some examples of that in the next slide. We look for a pattern of activities that might suggest an ongoing relationship. Say somebody participates in a few workshops with the same group of people, and that group of people includes people with conflicts who might probe that a little bit more. We look at recent papers for the acknowledgement sections to see who might be supporting the research. We look at internet for links to special interests. For example, we had a monograph on estrogen, progestogen, contraceptives, and hormonal therapy. And we did find one of our experts who did not declare it to complete competing interest was featured in a set of basically marketing meetings advertising the use and safety of a particular contraceptive device. That was not declared as an interest, and people have sometimes had different views of what should be declared or not, but sometimes you can find these interests by just looking at the internet for a little while. And we review what constitutes a conflict at the meeting to make sure everyone really understands what we're doing. So an example of an objective question versus a speculative question, at the time, the one on the left was an actual question that was being used by a prominent organization. If this committee activity were to provide the basis for government regulatory action, could the research funding and support for you or your close research colleagues and collaborators be directly affected. That requires the person to make a speculation that the research sponsor is going to be vindictive, going to cut them off, and that they perhaps even could cut them off because maybe they've already received the funding. It's already in the research organization's account, and it can't be taken back. So in that case, they would answer no. But the objective question is to declare your financial interest. Employment in consulting and research support derived from commercial entities whose operations or products result in human exposure to and particular chemicals or agents that we're looking at. So if you ask a specific question like that, it's easier, I think, to get the correct answer from the expert. In talking with experts, I've heard quite a few things. Some were back in the era of not worrying about conflicts, just get them all together and let them fight it out. Or someone said, I didn't disclose it because the money doesn't affect my views. Someone said, I get paid no matter which side wins. This was expert testimony in court. And that goes back to the specific question about research funding. I've already gotten the money. I've already deposited it in the university's account. They can't take it back. I get paid no matter what I say. That's not what we mean by declaring an expert interest. I've had people say, well, this is vaccines or drugs, and they save lives. I get the final say in what's published, or I'm just telling the truth. We get a lot of people who have those attitudes, and that's why we try to talk at the beginning of the meeting about what we really mean by a conflict of interest, and we sometimes do get a few more conflicts that are declared at the meeting. In that case, we might move somebody to invited specialist status and limit their participation at the meeting. We've also seen late-breaking reanalyses to counter positive studies. IARC, they take all published papers up to the time of the meeting, and sometimes within the week before the meeting, there is a new special interest of a journal that comes out, and it's got a lot of reanalyses, but none of the results are as positive as they appeared by the original investigators. We've seen an ad hoc conference sponsored a couple of weeks before a monograph meeting where 4 or 5 of our monograph experts were invited to go to this conference to spend several days with the special interest, probably listening to their views. I've seen honoraria disguised as travel reimbursements. Somebody once showed me a letter about honoraria that they were being paid and said, if you would rather this not show up so you don't have to declare it, we can adjust your travel reimbursement to cover this amount. We've also had staff of an interested organization come to Lyon, France to monitor a meeting, and then they communicate through an observer invited specialist at the meeting. We watch carefully for things like that, but these are the types of things that have happened at committee meetings. I mentioned about late-breaking conflicts that arise. This is not something that happened at IARC. It happened actually at US EPA before I went to IARC, but somebody showed me a letter. Last month, I was contacted by so-and-so of EPA's Office of Research and Development regarding my availability to attend a conference. As we discussed last winter, there are excellent technical arguments to justify levels of fish consumptions of 1 to 3 grams per day. We can do this work for $15,000, and we believe that this could be effective in reducing the current estimate of 30 grams per day down to 1 to 3 grams per day. For your information, 1 to 3 grams per day is about 1 to 3 ounces of fish per month, maybe a fish meal every 2 or 3 months. That's not very much. But this was after someone received an invitation to a meeting. They sought to turn it into a contract. Independent reporting of conflicting interests by a third party. This is something I really want to talk to you about. This is something I think that we did at IARC, which was really novel. And I don't think it's been very well duplicated. And I think it holds great promise to make sure that organizations that adopt a strong policy don't backslide. So IARC, as I said, identifies its experts, reviews their declaration, and invites experts to a meeting. And at the meeting, IARC asked the experts to update their current declaration for IARC, but also we passed out the conflict of interest form that was used by Lancet Oncology in publishing articles to that journal. And then we sent those directly to the editor of Lancet Oncology, who independently reviewed the conflict of interest statements, and the editor of Lancet Oncology reported any conflicting interest that he found alongside an article where we summarize the results of the monograph meeting. This, I think, serves as a really good check and balance on an organization, that if an organization becomes more lax about conflicting interests, decides, this isn't really a conflict, we'll let more experts in with this particular type of interest. We have an independent party, the editor of Lancet Oncology, asking the experts for a similar declaration of interest using the questions that Lancet Oncology asked for, and independently reporting those interests. So that ensures that IARC will be transparent in what interests any experts might have. And I think it provides a nice check and balance on that. I think it prevents an organization from becoming lax. I was really proud of this innovation, and I hope it's a model for some other organization. Another thing is freedom from interference. Before a meeting, IARC posts a list of the experts invited to a meeting on their website. And also above that list of names, they have this paragraph. IARC requests that you do not contact or lobby meeting participants, send them written materials, or offer favors that could appear to be linked to their participation. IARC will ask participants to report all such contacts and will publicly reveal any attempt to influence the meeting. This, we hope, acts as a deterrent to some of the things where there could be some kind of lobbying either before or during a meeting. We remind committee members to safeguard the integrity of everyone's work by resisting all attempts at interference, report them to the heads of the monographs program, and we also have a statement in the preamble that says it is not acceptable for observers or third parties to contact other participants before the meeting or to lobby them at any time. By the way, I've just noticed I occasionally say we. I do not work for IARC. More than 10 years, but it's just hard to get out of that mindset when I'm talking about the wonderful work that IARC does. So a summary of IARC's process on conflicting interests. IARC invites the most qualified experts. They also ensure that its committees are not influenced by conflicting interests because they have this invited specialist role that balances this tension between most qualified experts and impartial experts. And IARC provides for independent reporting of conflicting interests by a third party and takes additional steps to keep meetings free from interference. I will say that I want to talk a little bit. One reaction was the Lancet Oncology in 2005. If you recall, the editorial published by the Lancet was 2003. So 2 years later, the Lancet Oncology looked at what we were doing and they say this is an important step towards restoring trust in the way that results of studies done by publicly funded agencies are both prepared and reported. The issues encountered by IARC are not unique, and we hope this initiative will serve as a model for other health agencies. So that we thought was really quite a good tribute, and I hope people look at that. Also, IARC's process was used as a model at the US EPA. They have a process for doing peer reviews that are managed by contractors. Many of their peer reviews, most of them in some areas, are done by their Science Advisory Board, or for example, this Clean Air Act Scientific Advisory Committee, but they also have a lot of peer reviews that are managed by contractor, where the contractor identifies peer reviewers, communicates with peer reviewers, receives the peer reviewers' comments, and puts them together in a report that they send to EPA. The US EPA changed that process in 2015, and they used some of the elements from IARC. They select experts who adhere to conflict of interest criteria. The contractor who's organizing the peer review meets with EPA science advisor who determines whether conflicting interests have been adequately addressed by the contractor. EPA will post the list of peer reviewers, including the language that mimics IARC's. It says EPA requests that no individual or organization contact in any way its contractor or the subcontractor panel members, send them written materials, or make other offers to them. And then the US EPA asks the peer reviewers to re-sign their conflict of interest forms at the meeting. And there's a link to US EPA's process for contract to manage peer reviews. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that having good studies, that are research studies, are not enough. We also need good review committees who are composed of knowledgeable experts, who are free from conflicting interests, and who can work free from interference. So another way I would say that is not only must we reach an appropriate conclusion, we must do so in a transparent manner that promotes public confidence. And with that, I'm going to conclude. I want to thank the Academy again and the organizers of this meeting, and I want to thank all of you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that. I was not aware of some of these things, so I am fascinated and learning things from this whole session. I thank you for that. We do have a few minutes here for questions. If there are people who would like to pose a clarifying question or pursue something that was raised in this most recent talk. Trying to allow a little bit of time for the Zoom lag here for people to be able to raise their hand or submit comments through the chat to the staff. Other than EPA, have you seen any other? I am not doing well with my mouth today. I'm stumbling all over my tongue. Are there any other organizations you're aware of who are working in this direction, trying to adopt some of these approaches?
That's the only one I'm aware of. I have to say, I think that organizations that sponsor review committees, peer reviews, I think have made great progress over the last 15 years in since IARC put theirs out in adopting procedures that reduce the potential for conflicting interest to influence meetings. I'm not aware of anybody who does a third-party verification, and there may be some. Well, yeah, it's actually not a verification. It's not oversight over IARC. IARC invites whoever they want, and they have complete control over the committees. This is just somebody else who is able to look into the conflicts and make an independent report of them. But I'm not aware of anybody doing that. I am aware of a lot of people who want to keep the meetings free from interference. I think at federal government meetings and meetings of the California EPA, we have rules that all committee discussions have to take place in public, and there are warnings before a lunch break or something like that, not to discuss any of the material at the meeting with any of the panel members, or even for two of the panel members to have a sideline discussion, for example, over lunch. So I think that there is more of that that's seeping in.
Dr. Barrow.
So that is, I think, and then workshops like this, I think, give a lot of publicity to the importance of this issue, and some ways that different organizations have addressed it.
Dr. Barrow.
Yeah, thanks. I'm being slow on pushing my button, so that's thanks, Vince. That was a great overview of a lot of the interesting, models that IARC has put forth. I just do want to note that there are other guideline organizations that use this third-party review. As I disclosed in my first slide, I'm Conflict of Interest Advisor for Health Canada, and what that means is I provide third-party review for all of the conflicts of interest for Health Canada guidelines, and then they publish those. And I know that some members of this workshop have also been involved in third-party review for the National Health and Medical Research Council guidelines in Australia. It's not a model that's widespread, so I think it's really important to talk about it, but other guideline organizations are using that. And I think the really important thing about having the third-party review is they do need to take into account the context of each situation, because conflicts of interest are context dependent, and so that's something that's critical to the third-party review. And I have a paper on this. Actually, I'd be happy to send around. But thanks.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for
I do
telling me
think
about
the
that.
direct questions are quite helpful.
Participated in reviews by those organizations, but it's great to hear that that's happening. And what it does is when standards tighten up, it ensures that an organization gets some pressure to move with it.
Okay. Thank you so much.